and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, today on the show, I have with me two guests. Dr Teoh Ai Ni, who is Research Associate at Khazanah Research Institute, where her research covers nutrition, public health and food security. She recently published a series titled From Home Cooking to Eating Out, which looked at the shift in the types of food that Malaysian households are spending on. And I also have Dr Amjad Rabi, who is a social security economist who is currently a visiting expert at Universiti Malaya's Social Wellbeing Research Centre. He recently co-authored a paper on food affordability in Malaysia when markets and money decide what to eat. So both of you, welcome to the show. It's good of you to join me. I appreciate your time. And there's a lot to discuss when we talk about the broader landscape of how food and food spending and food affordability is changing in Malaysia. Dr Teoh Ai Ni, may I begin with you? I wanted to talk to you about this shift that you're seeing based on your research. You're seeing a shift towards eating out. And what struck me was that you found that almost, or more than half, or nearly half, of household food expenditure now is going to food away from home. What does that tell you about how Malaysians are spending on food, how that's changing?
Okay, like what you say, Malaysian household has been spending a lot more on food away from home over the years. But I would say that's not surprising given how our food service establishment in Malaysia, whether in rural, urban areas, has rapidly expanded over the years. But what's more profound from our study is that, well, number one is how food away from home spending rapidly increased after the pandemic. And second is how inflation actually affects how households spend on food at home and away from home differently. Number one, on food away from home spending, after the pandemic, Malaysian households, like you mentioned, spend 48%, which is nearly half.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yes, correct. Nearly half of their monthly food expenditure eating out, ordering online, or getting takeaways. And to give you a perspective how this spending has grown over the years, 20 years ago, it was about 33%, which means households spend about one-third of their monthly food expenditure on food away from home. But fast forward to now, households are spending at least half eating out, which is an equal amount to what they spend on household items eating at home. So the rate that we see in which households spend on food away from home really has been increasing at the rate that's higher than food at home. But the rate actually increased rapidly after the pandemic.
Why do you think that is?
I would think it's largely driven by the increased adoptions of online food delivery services during the pandemic, which has now continue to remain as essential tools in our daily life to obtain and acquire food. It is really a very accessible and convenient option for you to get food that is outside of your neighborhood. You can get food that is maybe 5 km away, and you can get it within like an hour if you are willing to pay. And of course, there are also a lot of factors that's playing into the food away from home trend. Number one is urbanization. So we have a lot more now food service establishment in our cities. Of course, we also see a lot of informal food vendors like hawkers and also street vendors. Increased women labour force participations because women used to be the ones shouldering the responsibilities of meal preparation. And now with more women joining the workforce, time, poverty and other issues is turning into quite a prevalent issues among the working class, which drive people towards the more convenient, accessible options like online food deliveries.
Interesting. Okay, we'll come back to that because I noticed some similarities in the the root causes of this issue or this trend that you're observing. Amjad, your paper looked at the food affordability in Malaysia. And I'm curious to know what you think are the reasons why food remains unaffordable for many, despite food prices being relatively stable over the years.
Thank you very much. I think it's because when we look at affordability, there are two sides to the equation. One side is the price. And the price level in Malaysia is relatively inexpensive in comparison to other countries. It's actually, there is a price level index that looks at countries. So Malaysia, there is a discount of 20%, let me put it this way, in comparison to the global average. So it's cheaper. But the price alone or price levels alone don't determine the affordability. Income does also. So we need to look at the other side of income. And I'm glad that you mentioned about the food service delivery, because there is another side to it. It's the low-wage earners now. It's expanding significantly in Malaysia. So if you look at what we call it incidence of low wage, and incidence of low wage, we can think about it in Malaysia in terms of the minimum wage. But in other countries, it's usually 2/3 of the median income. So incidence of low wage in Malaysia, the proportion of people who make the minimum wage, it's about 30% of the population. Other countries, it's very small share of the population, like average OECD countries or countries, industrialized countries. It's 14%. So you have
1/4.
1/4, yeah. So you have almost double that. So you have large share that they make low-wage earner, and they are delivering coffee to me, to you, or food or other things that makes it very cheap. And this where becomes interesting, the affordability, because you have so many people making minimum wage, which is also the minimum wage in comparison to other countries is lower, significantly lower. Have large the width and the depth of the issue, and then even inexpensive items becomes expensive. And we looked at basic necessity like milk, for instance. It would take 1 hour at the current minimum wage rate, 58 minutes to be precise, to be able to purchase 1 liter of milk, whereas other countries, we looked at Netherlands, for instance, 4 minutes. But not only rich countries like Netherlands. Turkey, it's at the same level of Malaysia. It would take 17 minutes of a minimum wage earner of her or his time to be able to purchase a liter of milk, where in Malaysia it's 1 hour. And that tells you, many things related to affordability of nutritious food.
Yeah, well, I think that's very important, because when you think about how much is spent, so sometimes because certain food groups can be more expensive than others, so when households spend more money, that doesn't mean they get more quantity, right? Dr. Teoh, you mentioned a bit about urbanization, and I think that's important to think about how that affects affordability and food security. How do you see it in terms of whether, in my head, being in urban areas or urban living would tend to make food more accessible and you'd have more food security. But that's not the case when affordability comes into play.
I agree with actually very much sharing in Dr. Amjad's paper that as in urban areas, actually in most of some semi-urban area as well, the determinant to food security most likely is not about the availability of food. Food is available and accessible depending on the types of food available. Can be from street food, can be from restaurant, cafes, and hawker centers and so on. But what's really determined is food, the ability you can afford the food. So what I wanted to share here is like how we're actually quite interested to share this actually about the differential impact of inflation on how households actually purchasing food. So that explains another factors beyond inflation actually and how actually households have to weigh and make trade-off when they're making decisions about food. So as you know, food prices has been increasing every year, yearly. So expectedly, household would have to spend more money to secure food. So if we look at food at home and food away from home specifically, for food at home, we notice that Malaysian household has been spending more money every year to secure the food away from home. But when you adjust for inflation, which is the yearly increases due to inflation, because then we notice that households are actually getting the same amount of food.
Food, but spending more.
Yes,
so
spending more money.
Is the differential the inflation?
Yes. So that actually shows the true purchasing power after you adjust for inflation. So even though households are spending more money on food at home, they are actually getting the same amount.
Is it because food away from home or prepared food the inflation rate is higher than what is, say, some controlled items for raw materials of food. Is that why?
So the impact of inflation on food away from home is different than food at home.
Oh.
So for food away from home, inflation is also, if we compare food at home and away from home, food away from home are actually increasing at about the same rate as the prices of food at home. But interestingly, Malaysian households continue to spend more money on the nominal value and in real value. Real value means the inflation adjusted. That means households are spending more money to eat out, getting takeaways or order online, but then they're also getting bigger quantity or opting for the pricier options. So it means that Malaysian households are actually increasingly would prefer the benefits of eating out, such as convenience, time saving, even though food away from home is actually a pricey option.
Can I ask you, Dr. Teoh, if Malaysians are sacrificing nutrition for convenience?
I would say yes. Food away from home definitely offers many benefits, such as convenience, time saving, variety, taste, and opportunity socialization, which is a strong culture in Malaysia. But whether or not Malaysians are sacrificing sacrificing nutrition for convenience, we don't have the exact data yet. But what we can observe is that food away from home options tend to be unhealthier, because as a consumer we have very little control.
Right? Yeah, you don't know what's being prepared.
Yes,
yeah. Amjad?
How things are prepared, what goes into the meal that we order, and the cooking methods.
Correct.
Yes.
I wanted to add on the inflation question. I mean, I looked at also like the inflation in Malaysia in comparison with other countries from 2010 all the way to today. So in Malaysia, it's relatively into the lower end. So inflation is not as much as other countries. So if a basket of good in 2010 would cost 100 ringgit, today it will be 130, little bit more, 130 ringgit. So if you compare it, for instance, for high inflation country like Turkey, the 100 ringgit will be 800 ringgit, just to tell you. So in Malaysia, it's relatively, the inflation is relatively okay. But we've seen in 2022 an spike in food price inflation, it's about 6.8%. And then if you look at the study that Dr. Muhammad Khalid, did for UNICEF on urban poverty, they asked them, how did you cope with inflation? And then they said, we skipped a meal or substituted one meal for another. So for instance, instant noodles increase the consumption from 40% to 46%. So you are in, especially the low wage earner, you have a budget constraint. Your income is very little. And you wanted to distribute it to get calorie intake that will restore your ability to participate in labor market or to do other activities. You go to check on for instance, 1 kg of meat, of beef, would cost me if I'm low wage earner, it will be 4.5 hours to get 1 kg, half a day of work.
You have to work for 4.5 hours to afford
1 kg. So
at minimum wage? At
minimum wage. And that, in comparison to other countries, you can do it 45 minutes in New Zealand. So just to tell you. So now, if I'm faced with this question, and you need to get your budget to get you the calorie that you need, then you go for calorie-dense products that like instant noodles. And I think this is the dynamic, the nutrition transition is called. It's where people transition. But it's also like, I think the factor, we cannot underestimate also the urbanization lifestyle. You know, why it's in Malaysia is quite interesting is very rapid urbanization process in Malaysia. If you would go back to, the time of independence, 1957, you would have 4 out of 5 Malaysians live in villages, in rural areas. 4 out of 5. Now, 4 out of 5 live in cities. This is a remarkable shift. And with it, when you're in rural area, you rely on subsistence farming here and there. Maybe there is scarcity of food at certain time. that you mitigate that with different ways. But it's not like what we've seen, like inflation or other things in cities where you don't have access to land to eat what you fish, or you have to stretch your budget.
So I think for me, we have to establish whether this is a concerning trend. When you, in your paper, Dr. Ai Ni, talked about how we're spending, most Malaysians are spending nearly half of their household income on food away from home. Is this a concerning trend? Is it something that requires government intervention or policies to reverse? Or is it something we think, market forces at work here, let it be what it is? What do you think?
I think there are two parts to your question here, so I'll try to answer. Number one is the implication of should we be concerned about the eating out trend? Yes, number one is it has implication on cost of living. As we all know, even though as compared to other countries, food prices in Malaysia is relatively lower in comparison. But within our countries, if you look at just food away from home and food at home, food away from home is generally more expensive. Naturally, because the owners have to take into account operation costs, manpower costs, and so on. So when households continue to spend eating out, we will have to allocate, in order to maintain our consumption pattern, household will have to spend more money.
And more, yeah.
Yeah, and we mentioned that just now, that this trend, eating out trend, is not driven because it's cheaper. It's also because it's convenient. Because it's convenient, because households do not have the time to cook. Yeah. So when prices increase, likely that demands for food away from home will likely continue to stay. So households, to maintain this pattern, they will have to spend more. Then you eat into their disposable income, which actually can be attended for essentials expenditures such as like for savings.
Yeah.
And this is also a concerning issues for lower income households as well. Eating out trend is not only prevalent among the higher income household. Not only the high income people can afford eating out. We also see low income and so middle income household increasingly favoring eating out, ordering online, and also getting takeaways. The reason again is obvious, because of convenience and time poverty, time constraints. So especially for low income. So for our analysis, we see that yes, higher income household, they spend a higher amount of value, money, on food away from home. But if you look at compare that respective to their disposable income, lower income household and high income household actually spend the same share of their disposable income of food away from home. So when food away from home prices continue to increase, which has been rising more rapidly than food at home for the past few months and years, lower income household will suffer more because of their limited disposable income. So goes back to purchasing power and again affordability, not cost per se. Wow. And the second implication is health implication, because food away from home prices and variety can really differ based on the sources. Food away from home can be from restaurants, can be from cafes, bakeries, vending machine. It can also be from informal vendors such as night market, bazaar, Ramadan bazaar, and also street vendors. But in general, the options that we have outside tend to be less healthy, such as they're higher in fat, sodium, sugar, higher in portion, which translates to higher energy intake as well, which are all common risk factors for obesity, diabetes, and other NCDs.
Okay, so there are implications to this trend. So does it merit government intervention? Should policymakers intervene in the way Malaysians eat?
I think it's a good question. I mean, my view is yes, because we have a market failure. And usual government's intervention, I mean, it comes into correct market failure. And specifically, there is a health implication, as Dr. Teoh just mentioned. If you look at the malnutrition in Malaysia, it's alarming. You know, like we looked at not only obesity but also stunting, so you have both of them. This is really alarming. It's a situation that requires the government to intervene when you have 23% of children under the age of 5 in urban communities that they suffer either obesity or stunting. So again, this is a pandemic. If above 20% becomes alarming. So it requires the government to intervene. But to me, it's also, there is the, I was in Malaysia 2016-18, left, I came back in 2022. The first thing that came to mind, like, wow, what's happening to Malaysia is the food delivery. This industry, I mean, it went like viral, maybe you don't see it. And the reason is because cheap labor, over-reliance on cheap labor. You know, there is no other country that it will cost you nothing to get your cup of coffee moving to your apartment cheaper than Malaysia. So I don't even need to make a cup of coffee, just walk to the kitchen, which is not much, and just to make my cup of coffee. No, I can order it because it's very cheap. So that's, and once you have low wage, the low wage will not afford you nutritious food, but the low wage also makes the options of food delivery cheaper at home. So I think specific interventions on the low wage, it should be, for instance, all Grab drivers, they should, to me, they should be contributing to Social Security, whether SOCSO or EPF. And that will increase the wage to a fair wage, like 24%, because now more expensive, but it will protect them if they have a car accident, or it's good for everyone. At the same time, you correct this price mechanism.
I see. I didn't see the correlation. Very quickly, just Amjad, you mentioned in your report minimum wage adjusted to inflation. Is that something that you think will correct the market failure you mentioned?
We must, actually, because it's also like, if you look at how the minimum wage has been increasing, it was like a decision made, right? It's not based on, you know, like real data or anything, and it's
quite arbitrary.
So exactly, it's very arbitrary. So what we wanted to see is, like other countries, that you link minimum wage to like an indicator. So we propose that you keep it at 2/3 of the median income. So median income in Malaysia, 2,600. So it will come about 1,800 ringgit. But the beautiful thing about it, it's not every year that the government needs to think about it and public it increase automatically. Labor force surveys done every year, every 2 years. So when the results are there, then automatically you maintain it at 2/3 of median.
That's a good idea. Dr. Ai Ni, when you think about interventions, do you think taxing, sugar tax, for instance, or taxes on other, you know, less nutritious foods, would that work correct this imbalance or market failure?
Thanks for the question. We actually have unhealthy food taxes in Malaysia in the form of sugar sweetened beverage tax, or we call SSB tax. There was also a talk of introducing fat tax around the time of Budget 2025 announcement, but it was not included in the actual announcement or budget. But it's interesting that there is a rising interest or call for more unhealthy food taxes in Malaysia, but I don't think that's the way forward. Yes, unhealthy food taxes can deter unhealthy food consumption. In this case, it would be sugar sweetened beverage, in light of the high obesity and diabetes rate in Malaysia. But their impacts can be limited. For example, in Malaysia, our SSB tax has been more effective in encouraging product reformulation than to actually increase the prices meaningfully to actually reduce consumption altogether. That's where we also need policy that don't just deter unhealthy food consumptions, but steer people towards the healthy options. And we do not have, I would think we do not have enough of that in Malaysia.
You mean like subsidies for nutritious food? Is that what you were referring to?
That can be one option.
Or incentives, other incentives.
Yes, there can be it can be one option, but broadly you can call them nudges or incentives. Nudges are behavioral tools where, for example, through labeling, through product placement, you nudge people towards choosing the healthier options. Maybe less consciously, but without restricting their freedom to choose. And we can also consider incentive. Subsidies can be in a form, but it might be tricky because looking at the fiscal challenges Malaysia is going through and governments plan to rationalize subsidy. But we can also look at other forms of incentives, such as incentivizing people through vouchers, fitness tools, and programs that actually encourage them to choose the healthy options. So Singapore had actually several initiatives that is actually, I would think, successful and worth looking into for Malaysia, and to adapt into our context.
Interesting. Well, we've run out of time, but this is such a rich topic to unpack. We'll definitely have to spend more time going into the issues of food affordability in Malaysia. I appreciate both of you for coming on the show and sharing some of your hard work and research in your papers. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.